Okay, our brother's question was how much knowledge should one acquire before one ventures into the field of Dawa? Actually, you missed our first session. Had you been here, you would not have asked this question. But for those who have joined late, we already mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith found in Sahih Bukhari, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, convey whatever you have learned from me, even if it be only a single verse from the Quran. So, if you have some knowledge, even if it's only a single verse, and we talked about قُلْ وَاللَّهُ أَحَدٍ and its implications, that we call to قُلْ وَاللَّهُ أَحَدٍ. If we have more than قُلْ وَاللَّهُ أَحَدٍ, then we call to whatever we have. But we are obliged to call according to our ability, to the amount of knowledge that we have. What we don't have, we don't call to. We stop at the limits that have been determined by the amount of knowledge that we have. Okay? There was no question from the sisters. We'll go ahead. I will just allowing two questions and we'll go on. Huh? No? Okay, the next category that we're going to deal with now is the characteristics of the called. Those people who are being called to Islam. What are the points that we have to keep in mind? The first point is to determine whether our duty, what is it that we're engaged in? Is it conversion or clear communication? What is it that is required of us? To clearly communicate the message or to convert those who we are communicating with? It's clear communication. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. Indeed, you cannot guide whom you love. Allah is telling Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you cannot guide whom you love. He wanted to guide Abu Talib, his uncle, who raised him, defended him, protected him, loved him, and he loved him. But he couldn't guide him. As Allah said, you cannot guide whom you love. But Allah guides whom He wills. That is the bottom line. So our duty is not guiding people. So Allah explained in Surah Nur, وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. The only obligation on the messenger is to give the clear message. And that's what we have inherited. The obligation to give the clear message. Giving a clear message. Not to convert people. Conversion is the choice of the individual and the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's very important because it takes a big weight off our backs. If we think in our minds that our duty, our responsibility is conversion, and then you go out to give da'wah, you go to 10 people, to 20 people, to 50 people, and no one is converted, you think you'll be able to keep going? You'll fall into despair. You say, obviously I'm doing things wrong, I'm useless, I'm not capable, I can't, what's the point? Let me just stay home. No point. Because you thought that your duty was to convert, but no. Your duty is only to convey the message. And what happens, in any case, that the majority of people who convert to Islam, they don't convert because somebody sat with them and they went from zero to Islam. No. One person planted a seed. Somebody else watered it. Somebody else pruned it as it was growing. Somebody else, protected it till it became a full tree. And then somebody at the end plucked the fruit. That's how it came. In most cases, that's how it is. In the Dawa center that I'm in Qatar, we have people coming in to accept Islam daily. We have people coming in. And we sit with them. They're in different stages. Sometimes it is a case where a person comes in. I remember one person coming in saying, listen, I don't plan to become a Muslim, right? I don't want you to try to convert me, but I have a couple of questions I want answered. Okay? After answering the questions, I asked them, well, what is it that now is stopping you from becoming a Muslim? And they stopped for a minute and they thought. I said, well, I really don't know. I don't think there's anything. So I said, well, then why don't you become a Muslim? I said, okay. But they came in saying, I didn't come here to become a Muslim. I don't want you to try to convert me. Okay, so they had already been picking up information. And they had actually reached the point where there was only 2 questions left that they didn't find answers for, right? So once those questions were gone, then finished. But somebody else had been working, somebody else had given them a pamphlet, or they had watched some program on television, or listened to a tape, or read a pamphlet, or people had been working all along. So that is the norm. Of course, you do find occasions where you do get a chance to take a person who first shows interest and finds Islam all the way to the end. But that's rare. That's rare. The vast majority of the cases, people have been working all along. Or that person has been searching all along. They've been reading, questioning, asking here, there, until finally they reach the point where they're ready to accept Islam. So, we recognize that our duty is only to convey the clear message. And we said the clear message is what? The Quran and the Sunnah as understood by the Sahaba. That is the clear message. As it was understood by the Sahaba. As it was understood by you and me, people around the world, in this community, or in Pakistan, or in Egypt, or whatever. No. That's confusion. Right? If somebody is to try to find Islam in the midst of all that, it's confusion. What they can find, what is Islam, is the clear message. Free of the cultural baggage that we are carrying, that we have inherited from our foreparents. The pure Islam. That is what our responsibility is to convey. The second basic principle which we need to keep in mind is listen before you speak. Listen before you speak. What is the point of this? The point here is to find out what the person is thinking. I call this also the doctor methodology. This is the methodology of the doctors, right? That the da'i, the one calling to Islam, is like a doctor. When you go to see the doctor, if the moment you open the door, the doctor looks at you and they start writing a prescription for you. By the time you sit down, he hands you the prescription and says, go take that and you'll be fine. That's not going to work. Right? If you find a doctor like that, go find another doctor. Right? The doctor is supposed to have you sit down, then ask you, find out what's happening. You tell them where your pains are, where your aches are, whatever, what you're experiencing, etc. Then the doctor, after gathering all that information, then he writes your prescription. Right? So he has to find out what is wrong. And it's the same thing. The person calling to Islam has to find out where is the ailment, where is the spiritual ailment that the person you're dealing with has. They're spiritually sick. They may not realize it, but you need to find out where is the essence of that ailment. Don't assume because they're Hindu, they believe as all Hindus believe. Or they're Christian, they believe as all Christians believe. Because people have their own individual personal beliefs and choices, etc. A person may come from a particular tradition, but in their minds they have gone beyond those traditions. They have left them, or they've modified or made their own interpretations or whatever. So you want to find out where that person is spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Where are they before trying to take the message to them? So we listen before we speak. The third principle to keep in mind is put yourself in the other person's shoes. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Meaning, you're talking to a non-Muslim. Think about the terminology you're using. Is it appropriate? Is the person going to understand what you're talking about? You use the term Allah, for example, and surveys done in the US, and there's probably no doubt here too, show that close to 80% of Americans thought that Allah was the God of Muslims. You know, like Hindus have Shiva, Muslims have Allah, and then there's God. They thought Allah is different from God. So now when you're talking to them and you use the term Allah, 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 then they're thinking you're talking about your own personal God that you all have, which is different from the God. Right? So similarly, if you're talking to somebody about fasting and you use the term Sawm, you know, we Muslims do Sawm, and you have to stop and think. This is a non-Muslim. Are they going to understand? It's an Arabic term. Fasting, yes, they understand the word fasting, but Sawm they don't. You know? So we have to be sensitive when we are calling people. What the words we're using, the way we as Muslims talk amongst ourselves, we have certain common words which we understand. We can't use those. We have to be careful. We have to be particular. Choose our words well, keeping in mind the people whom we are talking to. You know? So as I said, put yourself in the other person's shoes. You want to try to prove a point. You're quoting a verse from the Quran and the person doesn't even believe in the Quran. It's not appropriate. Though yes, our da'wah should be based on the Quran, but quoting verses from the Quran when the person doesn't even believe in the Quran is useless. You know? What we instead do is we take the wisdom of the Quran, the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ and his Sunnah, and we convey that wisdom to them. Right? This is how the da'wah is still based on Quran and Sunnah, but you're not using terminology which is unacceptable to the people you're calling. The next point we have to consider is that we must understand the situation that we are entering into. We're going into a da'wah situation to give da'wah. We must be able to interpret the situation that we find ourselves in. Meaning that we have to take into account a variety of factors concerning that environment. We're in a dawah environment. We have to understand that environment. If we don't understand the environment, then we will likely be doing inappropriate things. Right? So first and foremost, we have to keep in mind timing. Our timing. Choosing the most appropriate time to give dawah. It's known that if you want to try to give dawah to somebody who is busy, they're busy, they're doing something, they're busily involved in that thing, to try to talk to them about Islam is not appropriate then. Because they can only give you half an ear. They can't listen to you completely because they're busy. They're distracted with something else. So you have to find a time when the person is free, when they're relaxed, you know, when it's appropriate now for you to try to get the message across to them. And we have to give people, in terms of timing, enough time to absorb the material we're giving them. You have to give them enough time to absorb the material you're giving them. Don't assume that simply because a person is willing to accept a pamphlet, a cassette, a booklet, that they're ready to accept Islam. I mean, in our center there in Qatar, sometimes we'll have Qataris calling us up and saying, we have somebody who's ready to accept Islam. So I'll say to them, How do you know they're ready to accept Islam? They took a pamphlet. I said, brother, please, taking a pamphlet doesn't mean they're ready to accept Islam. It just means they took a pamphlet. They're open enough to take it and to read. Give them some time, you know. Or some people, somebody expressed an interest, yes, okay, I wouldn't mind reading something. So you bring them a carton of books and pamphlets and tapes and overload, information overload. No, just give them a small pamphlet, let them read that first. If that is sufficient and they have grasped that, they want more, they will tell you. Or you can ask them, would you like some more? You know, so give them time. Again, your timing. And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to limit his lectures, you know, to like once a week. And that's what the companions did. Even when people used to ask them to give them more extensive lectures, they said, no, we want to stay with the Sunnah. Prophet ﷺ had said, you know, not to give people so many lectures, they become bored. They're hearing you all the time. As we said, familiarity breeds contempt. You know, familiarity breeds contempt. Meaning that if you hear, for example, right now, you're all in here listening to me give you a lecture. Because I've come from miles away. Okay? New, unique. Now if I were here every day, right? And you came every day, maybe you'd hang around for a week or so. By the second week, some of you would start dropping off. By the third week, more and more. And once you feel I'm going to be here anytime, well, khalas, you know, you don't have to come every day. You can come once a week or whenever you feel like, because I'm always here. That's familiarity breeding contempt. This is the nature of human beings. When you're constantly in contact with something, you start to look down on that thing. You don't value it as much as when it is rarer. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, give your lectures, you know, once a week or twice a week. Give space in between. Give people a chance to absorb and to feel a sense of newness when they come for the lecture, you know. Also, when we look into the people that we're talking to, are we talking to one person or are we talking to a group of people? Important point. That as a general principle, Dawa is most effective when you're speaking one-on-one. This is the most effective Dawa. Of course, sometimes you may be invited into a circumstance where there's a group of people. So you give it to that group. But if you have a choice, shall I give it to a group or give it to one? Better to give it to one. Better to give it to one. Why? Because there's such a thing known as the group mentality. You know the group mentality? When you have one person, you're talking to them, they don't feel the pressure of anybody else around them. They will agree to things that if they were in a group of their own people, they would not agree to. If they're in the group, they're looking around to see what everybody else is saying, you know. If they see the group is leaning in one way, then they lean along with that group, you know. They'll feel shy to express their own agreement or whatever when they see the rest of the group doesn't agree. That's the nature of people, the group mentality. People, you know, adapt and adjust and go along with the group. So it's better to avoid the group circumstances for Dawa. Choose, you're in your workplace. You know, there are people in there, you'd like to talk to them about Islam. Don't try to talk to a group of them. Befriend, develop a relationship with one and give Dawa. And another one, give Dawa. As individuals, better than trying to talk to a group of them at one time. Also, one of the things that Muslims commonly do is if you see one Muslim talking to a non-Muslim, you run over. You want to be in the conversation too, you know. You want to put your 2 cents in. Somebody else comes running over. Another one comes running. Till the one non-Muslim is surrounded by a group of Muslims. Everybody's throwing in this and that from here and there. Person is looking around. Destroys the Dawah. If somebody is giving Dawah, let them give the Dawah. You don't have to give your 2 cents. You say 2 cents worth. You have to, if you feel you have to add something here. No, let them give the Dawah. If they need help, they will call you. Could you come over? There's a point here that maybe you could explain. So allow people to give the dawah individually. Of course, another point to keep in mind when we're dealing with reading our situations is the location. The location that we're going to give the dawah in. There are appropriate locations and inappropriate locations. Going to try to give dawah to people when they're in bars or discos, it's obviously inappropriate, They may be your friends and everything else, but it's just an inappropriate location. That's not the place for dawah. Whether it's because they're, in intoxicated states or things related to that, or they're too much involved in their enjoyment and, etc. It's bad timing, bad location. So it's better to choose a private location. Invite somebody to your home. Informal. Don't necessarily take them down to the local Dawa center, Ibn al-Qayyim or whatever, and sit them down there, and the sheikh comes to sit to them to give them dawah. No. And that's very formal. People, shy away from this. So better, you take them into your home, friend's home, whatever, you sit down, take them for coffee or whatever. You sit, you talk, it's an informal circumstance. These circumstances are much better for dawah than the formal circumstance. Now, in terms of the individual that you're dealing with, one has to keep in mind the background of the people. Of course, in your circumstance here, people tend to have a common background. There's a history here in India of Islam in India. And there are issues that have developed because of the relationship of Muslims with non-Muslims in this country. So one has to be aware of these things, be able to point out the positive input that Muslims made to the country, be able to recognize where Muslims made errors and did things which were not correct, harmed the local population, etc. Be able to distinguish between the two. Not just defend Muslims because they're Muslims. Whatever Muslims did, we're going to defend because we're Muslims. No. Where there's wrong, we have to be able to recognize it. So we're aware of the people's background, Again, if somebody's coming from America, who's here, or from some other country, you have foreigners who come here, work here for periods of time, whatever, you're giving dawah to them. It's good to have an idea of the background history in their own country. Is there contact with Islam earlier? What is the relationship with Islam, etc. So you can employ that in your communication with them. Similarly, the language. In India, of course, you have many different languages. I don't have to tell you that. Right? So if somebody is, Malayalam speaking, and you want to try to convey the message, but you only know Tamil, hey, you've got a problem here. Better to bring somebody who knows the language of the Malayalam people, that he would be able to communicate most effectively. Because we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said in Surah Ibrahim verse 4, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. I did not send any messenger except that he spoke the language of his people to explain to them. Right? All the messengers spoke the language of their people. That's why Islam was initially taught in Arabic. Some people question, why Arabic? Why do we have to deal with Arabic? Why not English? English is a more international language than Arabic is. Why Arabic? Well, because the final messenger was chosen from among the Arabs. So if he came with an English Quran, What would be the use of that? The people couldn't understand the message. He had to come speaking their language. So Allah chose that the final revelation to humankind would be in the Arabic language. That was His decision. And if He had wanted to reveal a Quran in English, which would be a miracle of prose and poetry in English, He could have done so. But He chose Arabic. English at that time was in tatters. It was undeveloped. It was still in the process of developing. Arabic was a refined language. Had reached its peak at that point. Islam came in Arabic, and the Prophet ﷺ taught Arabs. But that message was a universal message, so they took it to the world. And wherever they went, people learned Arabic, and they learned the Quran, and they learned the Sunnah, and the Deen remained in Arabic. Our prayers are in Arabic. People are like, well, why the prayers are in Arabic? You know, why all these things in Arabic? Well, this is again a unifying element that remains in Islam. That Muslims, wherever they go, they can communicate, they can pray together. If we went to Peking, for example, and they called the adhan in Chinese, who would know that they're calling the adhan? Who wouldn't know? Because the mosques there don't look like typical mosques, right? Mosques here have a particular format with the dome and this, you know, the minaret and these kind of things, you know, which is sort of common to Arabia and the countries nearby. But when you go into China, the mosques look like Chinese houses. They have these kind of tiled roofs, and it's curved, and so they're using this, you know, and really Islam doesn't require that they have a dome and minaret the way that we have it. It's not a requirement. So you wouldn't know where the mosque was. And if the adhan was in Chinese, you wouldn't know that it was time for prayer. But if it's in Arabic, no, any Muslim anywhere nearby knows this is a mosque, this is time for prayer, they go in. If the Imam led the Salah in Chinese, again, we wouldn't know when to bow, when to... It would be confusion for us. But again, Arabic unifies all of the Muslims. So we can pray with other Muslims anywhere in the world, regardless of what their language is. We have the common language of Arabic linking us all together. And also, that is the language of the final revelation. And as such, all Muslims should learn some element of it for their own contact with revelation, to be able to hear Allah's words as they were revealed. The second point that we need to keep in mind concerning the people that we're calling, the individual, is their level of education. Ali ibn Abi Talib was quoted to say, "Khatib an-nas ala qadri uqulihim." Speak to people according to the level of their intelligence. Meaning that if you're speaking to a person who is a graduate from university and a person who is a regular laborer, not that one is inferior, one is superior, but one has a different educational background, you're going to approach them in different ways. You have to take into account the various backgrounds that they have, and that will be important in giving the dawah. It will affect how you're able to convey the message. You know, for example, talking to a Christian who is a common laborer, taxi driver, or something like this. If you said to him, could you, as an individual, could you ever become God? You ask that individual, do you think you could ever become God? Now, that common laborer, whatever, he will say no. If he says yes, then leave him, find somebody else. That guy has got something wrong up here, right? So you go find somebody else who, is got their wits about them. So you ask them, do you think you could ever become God? And he says, no. Why? Well, because I'm a human being. Human beings are not God. So then you ask him, and what was Jesus? Was Jesus a human being? You say, yeah, he was a human being. Then, you say, he couldn't have been God, right? Now, the common person would say, oh, I never thought about it that way. Yeah, I guess he couldn't be. He couldn't have been God, really, yeah. I really never thought about it. They just told me that all the time when I was growing up in church. They just said this, so I was just accepting it. And, I never really stopped to think about it. Yeah, you're right. He couldn't have been God. Simple. But now, if you're dealing with another individual who has studied in university, he has taken philosophy 101, right? Now you have somebody else, somebody who is trained in the art of arguing, right? Who doesn't want to lose an argument, so he'll say anything. So when you ask him the first question, okay, he's honest, he says, yeah, I couldn't be God, it's true. Then you ask him, wasn't Jesus a man? Now he stops to think. If I say yes, which is what he knows he was, I'm going to lose the argument. So he says, sort of. What do you mean, sort of? Not completely. What do you mean, not completely? Then he goes into explaining, well, he was half God, half man, or he was man with God poured inside of him, or he only appeared to be a man, but he was really a God. All kinds of explanations. Philosophy now. He doesn't want to say he was a man, because he knows the next argument is he couldn't possibly have been God. So he doesn't want to go there. So he worms his way out by not admitting that Jesus was a man. So that's the difference. The first person, his mind had not been warped by philosophy, right? Distorted. He remains honest, a simple, basic mind. He's just ready to deal with the truth. You bring him the truth, okay, I can deal with the truth. So when you're dealing with people, you have to be aware of that. If you're dealing with somebody, university educated, etc., you have to be prepared for them trying to wiggle their way out of anything. You can't back them into any corner. Right? So you have to be conscious of that in the course of your dawah. The next point that we need to keep in mind also is that when we're giving dawah, part of it is clarifying misconceptions. Part of it is clarifying people's misconceptions. And there are many misconceptions about Islam. In fact, the next lectures will be focusing on the general issues that Muslims are faced with in dawah, and most of them are misconceptions about Islam. So, people, when they come with their misconceptions, you have to try to clarify. You should be aware of their misconceptions. You should try to bring out their misconceptions and clarify. But sometimes you find people are bringing misconceptions, they're just throwing them at you one after the other, not because they really want to know, but because they want to disable your da'wah. You're giving da'wah to somebody and this person seems to be responding positively. So this other person, he comes, he starts throwing in all kinds of stuff here. What about this? What about that? What about this? And of course, when you try to address these things, you'll just find yourself constantly backpedaling. You're trying to, oh, it's not this. No, it's not that. No, it's not this. And your whole da'wah has now been subverted. So you have to be able to distinguish between the person who genuinely wants to know and get clarification about a particular misconception and somebody whose intent is only to make you stumble, to trip you up, to sabotage your dawah. So, if we look, for example, at Prophet Abraham, when he went to the king and he told the king, Rabbi alladhi yuhyi wa yumit. My Lord is the one who gives life and causes death. The king was challenging him. Who is your Lord? He said, my Lord is the one who gives life and causes death. So he said, Ana uhyi wa umit. I give life and cause death. Now, Prophet Abraham could have stopped there and said, well, listen, actually, when we say that Allah gives life and death, is different from your giving life and death. Your giving life is that you didn't kill that person. You spared his life. You're giving death, you killed the person. Whereas what we're talking about in the case of Allah is Allah bringing non-living material to life. That's giving life. Causing death that in spite of any forces that people might try to stop death, He can take that life. Right? So you want to try. He didn't stop to give him this detailed explanation. Instead, he said, he jumped one step ahead and said, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ فَأْتِي بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ. Okay? Okay, if you think you're given life and death, okay, deal with this one. My Lord raises the sun from the east. Can you bring it up from the west? فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. The one who disbelieved just became dumbfounded. At a loss for words, he couldn't say anything. So he preempted him. He went one step ahead, took the ball back into his court, and stopped him. So we have to consider this as maybe a necessary step depending on who you're dealing with. Now, for example, I'll give you an example of that in our own dawah, giving dawah to a non-Muslim who is attacking us on the point of polygamy, for example. One of the first points they usually attack us on. Oh, you Muslims having 4 wives, and what kind of foolishness is this here, Oppression of women and all these other things. You can jump ahead by saying, listen, the Quran is the only religious book which tells people to only marry one wife. Does your book say that? No. Quran is the only religious book which says marry only one wife. Of course, it's a condition. If you can't be just to 2, 3, or 4, then marry only one. But still it's saying marry only one. You'll not find that in any other religious book. So you jumped ahead, put him on the spot. You're attacking us about polygamy. Our book says, even the monogamy you claim, marry only one. You don't even have a book saying that. The other point to keep in mind when we're dealing with people, of course, the subject that we choose to discuss or try to introduce Islam from. We have to try to find appropriate subjects. Choose the appropriate subject for the appropriate circumstance. If you are invited into a school and asked to explain something about Islam to students, then you have to choose a subject which can catch the mind of students. You have to choose the appropriate subject for them. What may be a good subject may not be appropriate for them. Similarly, if you are in a circumstance where people, for example, have a very negative concept about Islam in a particular area, some incident has taken place, then it's good, appropriate subject is to take that particular incident and use it as a means of catching their attention and presenting Islam through clarifying misconceptions. So we do have to consider the subjects that we use in the course of Dawa. At the same time, we have to keep in mind the method of delivery when we're giving the Dawa. We talked before, about talking to people in a gentle way, not shouting, getting heated, becomes an argument, just bumping heads. No point. If we cannot get the message across in a good way, the person doesn't want to listen to what you have to say. They're just saying and you're saying and neither of you are listening to each other, then better to leave it. You'll just you'll end up in the end having wasted valuable time, and you only leave with a headache, asking yourself, why did I get myself involved in that in the first place? So you try to kill it from the beginning. If you see that it's not going in a positive direction, it's not an issue of discussion, exchange of ideas, but just heated argument, then it's better to leave it. Right? The last point that I'd like you to keep in mind is that known as gradual progression, or the PAR principle. PAR. The PAR principle. What is the PAR principle? Well, PAR principle is used when taking into account the person you're dealing with, looking at their background in terms of where they're coming from. If they're coming to you hostile, and when people are hostile, you can see it in their eyes, you can hear it in their words. You Muslims, why do you guys, terrorists, these terms, we know the catchphrases of hostility, right? Or a person may be indifferent, they're not interested, or they may be neutral, okay, say, or they may be interested. Okay, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Or they may be supportive. Yeah, I agree. These are different levels that your audience, the individual you're addressing, could be on. And there are a number in between them. So when you're coming into a situation, take the worst case scenario, hostile. What do? Do you respond to his hostility with hostility? No. You're not going to go anywhere. We said that is useless. So what you need to do is P. Probe. P stands for probe. P-R-O-B-E. Probe. Means you have to dig in and find out why. Why is that person hostile? It's not the nature and the norm of people to be hostile. It's an abnormal circumstance, okay? So you want to find out what's behind that hostility. Their daughter ran away with a Muslim. It's hostile. Okay? If you don't know, that, and you're trying to give dawah, it's useless. You need to know what has set that person off. The uncle was in Iraq. He was caught by those guys in black, and his head was cut off on television. He's hostile. Okay? You need to know what has set that person off. So once you have probed and found out what is behind that person's hostility, then you apply A. A is align. You align yourself with the person. How do you align yourself with the person? You say, I can understand how you feel. I can understand how you feel. That person was hostile. I can understand. I can understand how I feel. That just simmers them down. I can understand how you feel. I can feel for where you're coming from. These terms, these common terms, which indicate a kind of empathy. I can sympathize with your situation. I can understand it. So that will calm them down. So that's, you have aligned yourself with them, right? Then you apply R. You raise them. After you have neutralized them, and you try to raise them now to a state of interest, or at least they're going to the neutrality. From neutrality, we try to raise them up into some willingness to hear, right? And eventually win them over to support. Right? So this is our principle. If a person is indifferent, they're not interested, then you may have to find something which will stir them up. Because though hostile is the worst in terms of trying to give dawah, a person who is indifferent is a person you have no chance of reaching. Right? You have to get that person emotionally involved. So better that they're hostile and you neutralize them than indifferent and you're talking to a wall. Right? So you need to stir them up. Even if it means saying something which will bring out some hostility, then from there you can try to get them involved. Right? So you keep in mind, as I said, the PAR principle. Probe, align, and raise. And this is common, I think you'll find it common in conversations, discussions in general. Whether you're in a Dawa situation or outside of a Dawa situation. If you're a salesman, this is one of the principles that they teach salesmen. You have to go sell your product, and you've got a hostile customer, then you have to remove that hostility. You have to find out what's behind it and, align yourself to get them interested in your product. Right? Win them over. So these principles that we've looked at are principles governing the person we are calling to Islam. We have to keep in mind who it is we are communicating with. That our responsibility is to convey a message, not to convert them. Convey the message. We should put ourselves in their shoes, use the language which is appropriate. We should, at the same time, choose the appropriate settings, timings, avoid groups, deal with individuals, more effective. Choose the topic well that we're going to introduce Islam through. And try to keep in touch with the state of the person you're communicating with. Listen to what they have to say, what their ideas are, before trying to address their problem. That comes into the same probe situation. Listen, but listen to find out. Not just listen to their rantings, but you listen finding out. You've probed, ask why. Why do you feel this way? Why do you look at Muslims this way? There's always a reason. Okay, so that basically covers, as we said, the mad'u, the one who is called. Before going on to our next topic, does anybody like to ask any questions? We can ask. And try to keep again our questions on the topic, what we have covered so far. It means you can go back to the call, the caller, right? And the status of dawah and the call. So whatever we've covered before. Each time I say you can ask questions, whatever covered before. Try to avoid going into areas we haven't covered. Okay, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. And let me just mention this, right? It's not necessary to keep saying salam alaikum wa rahmatullah each time, right? You come up, you ask a question. It wasn't really from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, and that to be each, because I know once you do it, then the next person comes is going to say Assalamu alaikum, and the next one, and the sister Assalamu alaikum. It's not necessary, you know.
I have shown kindness to my friends a lot, but they take me for granted. For example, I keep the water bottle for lunchtime. I go for prayer and come back. By the time my water bottle is taken, and then everyone drinks it, and even leave my bag open. They are like this with me. Like, I have to be strict with them. I have to shout at them at a certain point. What can I do? Sometimes I should not be patient with them. Sometimes I should tell them, please don't do it, once or twice. And then if they continue to do it, I should shout at them. What is?
Okay. Well, let's say that shouting at them is not going to help in your dawah. Right? At the same time, you don't want to be oppressed. But you have to keep in mind, I mean, what is your goal here? Why is it that they're going in and drinking your water? Why is it they're taking food out of your bag? Right? Is it because they don't have enough? You know, what is the reason behind it? Right? So you need to address what that reason is. Because if they have a need, then it's better for you to bring extra water and give it to them. Bring extra food and give it to them. So you show them kindness. You still retain the food that you need and the water you need, but you have given them, right? You show you've got a bigger heart than them. That this is what Islam encourages us to be kind to others, right? So my advice would be to try to see what the reason is rather than just react to the incident. Question from the sisters?
You had advised previously to a brother about physical appearance for a da'i. We would also like you to advise us for women also, the physical appearance when they are outside their houses.
Come again, please, sister.
Previously you had advised a brother about physical appearance of a da'i. I would also like to know the physical appearance of women when they are out of their houses. What is the actual concept of hijab?
Well, I think this is another topic. You know, the question on hijab.
When a woman speaks of hijab, does dawa for hijab? How should she be dressed? Can she wear, a hijab decorated with sequences, with bright colors?
But again, as I said, this is the topic of hijab, and I'm sure this question has been asked 1,000 times. I don't think I've been to India without the sisters asking hijab. And I'm sure Sheikh Salim heard it and Dr. Jaffa heard it. There's a time when we have to stop asking these questions, Actually, what I do when I go to lectures of this kind, then what I do is I ask people to write down their questions. And instead, I ask the questions and let them answer it. Because if I were to ask you now, what is your opinion as to what the hijab should be? You're going to tell me it's one which doesn't have sequins on it, which is not attractive in and of itself. It isn't see-through. It isn't all the conditions that we know for hijab. So, there's a point where we need to focus. We give the message. We have books which explain these things. And then we need to go on to, other questions. Be more specific if you're going to, because of course there may be some elements of hijab which need some clarification, but try to go for those which are the more specific and more, I feel, needed aspects of hijab that we need to keep in mind. For example, in terms of hijab, somebody may feel, or people may commonly feel, that hijab should be black. This is a point. Is it permissible for hijab to be another color other than black? What do you think? Huh? It's permissible? What do you think, sister? Should hijab be black, or is it permissible to be other colors?
Preferably dark, not particularly black, preferably dark.
Okay, if it's preferably dark, why do all you sisters wear black?
Because of the hadith, crows dressed up as crows came up. The Sahabiyas came out dressed up as crows.
Okay, this is a general description, right? You've already said that it could be other colors.
So, crows could be gray, brown.
Okay. So, but why don't you all wear gray and brown too? Why is it always black?
If you ask me personally, I also wear that color also.
Okay, alhamdulillah. But you know, because this is the point too. We don't want to give other people the impression that there is only one color allowed. You know, that variety which exists in Islam, we should also demonstrate it. You know? So even for the sake of demonstrating it to non-Muslims, though maybe we like black, for example, but as our sister does on some other occasions, also to wear some of the other dark colors. You know?
It is permissible to do Dawa using other scriptures, because I have read in the book Dawa according to Quran and Sunnah, it's bid'ah.
Okay, brother's question, is it permissible to do Dawa using other scriptures, meaning quoting from the Bible or from the Torah or from the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever? Can we use these texts in the course of our da'wah? Well, we do have a well-known hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab in which the Prophet ﷺ found him reading a portion from the Torah, and the Prophet ﷺ became angry with him and told him that if Musa was here, he would follow what I brought. From that, some scholars and others have concluded that it is not permissible to read other books. But the leading scholars of the past, people like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and others who were involved in da'wah to non-Muslims, they did quote their scriptures. Al-Jawab al-Sahih fi man baddala fi din al-Masih by Ibn Taymiyyah, extensive work. He quotes extensively from the Gospels and the different books of the Christians. So obviously he and Ibn al-Qayyim has a book also, and others didn't understand the hadith in the same way. What they understood was that if we are to read these books seeking guidance, then no, this is wrong. Whatever guidance, it is there in the Quran. If we read the book for comparative purposes, when we're explaining the message of Islam, we explain this is the message of Islam and it is also found in your book, fine. Somebody newly accepts Islam. Where do we go from there? Do we tell that person, go back now and study your scriptures and get all the evidence so you can call other people? No. Learn Islam first. Priority should be given to learning and knowing Islam. Then, after you have a foundation, your foundation in Islam is solid, then okay, to go back to your previous things and get information that you can be useful for you in explaining Islam to them, no harm. So, it is, we are dealing with what? The context in which we use those scriptures. If we're seeking guidance from it, no. The guidance should be sought from the Quran and the Sunnah. If we're seeking evidence, supportive evidence to what we have from the Quran and Sunnah, then no problem. We may extract information from them.